So we're here in Wim's office, and one of the things that he's in charge of is virtualization engineering at Oracle. One of the questions I often get is, okay, you've got so many different virtualization technologies. When do you use the one versus the other? And to do that, we have the man himself. So Wim, containers, Oracle VM, VirtualBox, Oracle VDI. When would I use one versus the other?
So I'll just go down the list of the products and explain what their purpose is for us, and I think that will make it clear. So when we start with the desktop, the smallest product is VirtualBox. Right? So Oracle VM VirtualBox is a open source product which has been around for many years and works. It's something that you install on top of an operating system. So it's not a Type 1 hypervisor, which people call a hypervisor that's installed directly on top of hardware and basically contains its own mini OS or administration domain. So VirtualBox is something you download for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, Solaris, BSD. It runs on pretty much any x86 platform, and it's a small application that you install. When you run VirtualBox, you can create virtual machines inside your environment. So if you're a Windows user on a laptop, you can then create a virtual machine that runs inside Windows, and you can install Linux or Windows or whatever OS you want inside that. And so it acts like it's a virtual x86 machine. And so it's very popular and widely used for that purpose. So consultants that travel a lot and want to have their environments to show to customers, or developers that are doing development for a product for an OS that's not installed on their laptop natively, or on desktops, it doesn't really matter. So it's mostly used for test and development purposes for developers or people at home or users, and not used for production workloads, right? So VirtualBox is in many ways similar to VMware Workstation or VMware Fusion,
okay,
and Parallels.
So great for like on a laptop and doing a demo or prototyping something.
Yeah, it's something you typically would install on a desktop or a laptop and use it for. It's more like personal use for virtualization, and so it works really well, and it's been great for us. Then, related to VirtualBox, but going more towards the server kind of environment, is VDI, right? Oracle Virtual Desktop. And VDI's purpose is to basically use thin clients like the Sunrays to connect to your Windows session that runs somewhere on the server. And since VirtualBox runs Windows really well, we use it as we use VirtualBox as the hypervisor to run your Windows VMs. So you're talking about many small 4-8 gig VMs running some version of Windows inside, and then the client connects to it. So Oracle VDI is basically you call it a desktop broker, right? Because you connect to a central management product where you log in, and it knows that you have a desktop, and it knows where that desktop runs on which server, and will connect you through to it. So in that case, when I get to work and I turn on my Sunray, it looks like I run Windows locally, but it runs somewhere in the server. And then when I go home and I reconnect, it still runs that session there. So there's all the advantages of standard VDI use, and VirtualBox has been really great for that, and so we keep using that as the hypervisor for the Windows sessions. And also in the VDI case, what ends up happening is that the customer will have a server or a number of servers that have either Solaris or Linux installed, and then VirtualBox runs on top of it. And then the Oracle VDI broker component, which is sort of the middleware connection layer, so that one will then talk to the backends. So that's sort of Oracle VDI. Then you go to like server workloads when you're talking about production applications like Oracle database or middleware, or
so if you want to stand up like an e-business suite, then
products you want to run in production, you want to run your business on, right? So server type applications where, for us typically Linux based or Solaris based on x86 in the Oracle VM for x86 case, and the typically larger VMs, 3264 gigabyte or more, and many virtual CPUs. Well, the VDI case tends to be 1 or 2 virtual CPUs and mostly a few gigabytes of memory. So it's basically a difference in the sizes. Now, so there you have a number of options, right? So Oracle VM on x86 is a real Type 1 hypervisor product. We use Zen in our case. And so it's a product that you install bare metal on a server. So you have nothing installed on the machine. You take the Oracle VM server CD, you install it, and it installs the hypervisor and a small management console, which in our case is based on Linux, but it's not something for standard use. It's really only to manage the VMs that runs a daemon. And then that just creates other VMs. So in the x86 case, we use that for certification of Oracle products, and that's where we say if you want to run rack or middleware or whatever, that's what you deploy. And also Exalogic. So Exalogic in a virtual environment uses Oracle VM as well. Mm-hmm. Then the other model which you alluded to was zones or containers. Mm-hmm. So that's more isolation rather than virtualization, right? So in the case of VirtualBox and Oracle VM, you end up with environments that act completely like hardware. Okay. It's virtual hardware, and the operating system sees an environment that looks like it's a physical machine. It doesn't really necessarily know it's virtualized, right? So in the case of zones/containers, that's at a higher level. So let's take Solaris in particular as the example. So with Solaris zones, you have one installation of Solaris on the hardware. And then when that runs, you can create isolated environments that look like a Solaris install, but it doesn't run a separate kernel. It's still that one Solaris kernel.
So they're all sharing the base kernel.
Yeah, they're sharing the base kernel, they're sharing the system resources, but the code in the operating system and the way a zone is created makes it look like you're isolated. You get your own virtual network, so to speak, and you get your own disk space, or it could be shared, but there's a number of options for that, and you have resource management. So it can basically isolate the system resources in a very similar way as you would with virtual machines, but you still run one kernel.
So you'd be limited to a specific distribution, or
you can't really run. So you cannot run multiple operating systems. Because,
okay.
They need to run a kernel, and you can't necessarily run multiple versions of the operating system. Now, with zones, you could say, oh, I can run a Solaris 10 container on Solaris 11, but the kernel is still the Solaris 11 kernel.
But it has
what
that compatibility.
You see is Solaris 10.
Okay.
And if you, there's currently no live migrates. If you want to move these things dynamically with zones, you can't do that. While with VMs, you can. Now, having said that, there is an advantage with zones, which is that there is no overhead, because you're not virtualizing devices, right? And so you're running more processes. So technically, if you run, the Oracle database in a zone, it will run exactly the same as it would run just on the operating system. So that's why.
So lighter on resources if your use case is that use case which supports it.
Yeah, if your applications are all based on the same OS version and the same OS itself, and you want to do that, then zones would be really great. Now, in the Oracle VM case, and of course, if you want to run Windows next to Linux, next to Solaris, you could do that. Mm-hmm. You cannot do that with containers. On the Spark side, we basically have the same offering. We have Oracle VM for Spark, which basically is a model to actually create virtual machines, domains, and so there's a hypervisor, lower level than Zen. It's actually in the firmware, so the hypervisor is in the firmware, and then you can carve up the system into separate domains, so you can run different versions of the operating system next to each other, right? And so you can reboot them independently, and you can really run different kernel versions. So it's like on x86, it's a hypervisor, and you have truly isolated virtual machines. And then of course zones, since Solaris on x86 and Spark is really just Solaris, it's the same code. You have zones on Spark as well, and then it works the same way as it would on x86. And you can even combine the two, right? One of the things you could consider doing is merging the concept of zones and domains, where you say, well, my application is multi-tiered. I have two middle tiers in a database for this one customer and something else for this other customer. And you can say, well, let me create a domain for the customer, and let me create within the domain and run Solaris, and let me create multiple zones to isolate the different pieces of the application stack within the domain. So you get the advantage of having live migrate, so you get mobility, and you have the advantage of no overhead within the application tier because they run on one OS kernel. And you can do that on x86 or on Spark with Solaris. And we're working on, which we announced last year, we're working on Linux containers as well at Oracle. And so you can start doing this now. It's not yet considered production quality, but you can actually now start creating containers on Oracle Linux. And it will behave very similar to, it's not the same, but it will behave very similar to
what people are used to with the Solaris zones. And you were doing with Oracle VM, I saw you're managing now the Spark.
Yeah, so Oracle VM introduced support for, Oracle VM Manager introduced support for managing Spark systems and x86 systems. So when we first released Oracle VM many years ago, and then also with version 3, the first version, there's basically two components to it. There's Oracle VM Server, which is the product that you install in each machine that runs VMs. And then there's Oracle VM Manager, which is a centralized management console that then talks to the agents running on each of these machines. And we ported the agent portion over to Solaris Spark, so that when you run the domains code, logical domains code, Oracle VM for Spark, then the manager will detect that and lets you do exactly the same. So basically we have one management product that can work across the two architectures with the same API, CLI, UI. So when you do create virtual machine, it'll ask you the architecture, which is really convenient because a lot of our customers don't run Windows, they run Linux or Solaris, and a huge chunk of the Oracle install base. And so with having one virtualization management product, we can address two architectures and
give the people a choice of what they want to use depending upon the case usage.
Yeah, exactly.
Excellent.